Thinking about installing some solar panels on your flat garage roof? There's plenty to consider, so watch this first before you take the plunge. Hi, I'm Chris and welcome to the channel. In this one, I'm going to be running through how I increased our solar generation by more than 20% by installing a couple of additional panels on our garage roof. Back in January 24, I published this video where I outlined my plans for a couple of upgrades I was going to make to our solar power setup during that year. The first of these was to increase our battery storage capacity by the addition of a Pylon-Tech US 5000 battery module. This was fairly straightforward and took us from 7 kWh to 11.8 kWh capacity, as I covered in this video. The second upgrade, with the aim of increasing our solar generation capability, was to increase the size of our solar array by adding more panels. Because our initial 4.5 kilowatt peak array was split equally into two banks of 6, one facing east and one west, I'd figured that adding 2 more panels into the east bank would still be within the capabilities of my inverter whilst keeping costs to a minimum. Why the east bank? Well, this would allow me to mount the 2 new panels on my flat garage roof and just connect them into the existing east bank string. Even more importantly, I could do all this myself. All dead easy then, if only. There's a fair bit to cover, so feel free to jump forward to any of the following sections. I've also included timings in the description below. Let's get started then. Well, if you've watched that video, you'll know that one of the first steps I planned to take was to get the garage roof redone. With it being well over 20 years since it was last replaced, and with a few areas where water was pooling on the surface and the underlying boards starting to sag, it just didn't make sense to not do this before installing the panels. I was initially thinking in terms of GRP, or EPDM rubber membrane solutions. However, after a couple of months of roofers not keeping appointments or then not giving me a price, I ended up going with a local guy who'd done work for us before but who only did torched on bitumen roofing felt. After he'd ripped off all the old covering and boards, replaced everything with new and laid down the new felt, I was pretty happy with the result, which will probably outlast me. By this time it was mid-May, but at least that was the roof sorted, or so I thought. It's now October 24, and before spending any serious money, I thought it was probably a good idea to check I could easily connect into the East Bank DC cabling. Up on the garage roof then, wherein I could see what seemed like a decent loop of cabling secured by one of the few zip ties that the installers had bothered to fit. But despite balancing on a small stool, this remained elusively just out of reach. I'm not as nimble as I once was, so couldn't get onto the roof itself. A quick route around the workshop revealed a couple of lengths of tubing, which, when taped onto the handles of my tin snips, resulted in something like Edward Scissorhands. Some very careful positioning later, so as not to cut the cable itself, and holding my breath, I snipped away. Result: I could now grab the cable and get access to the last connector in the string. Having already isolated the panels down at the inverter, and using a solar spanner, I separated the 2 halves of the connector and there we go, and patched in a couple of lengths of cabling already pre-fitted with connectors. So, first one in there, and the second one here. Make sure they're clicked. Yep. A few zip ties here and there, and I'd soon brought the new cabling loop down to the garage roof level, ready for installation of the panels themselves. Turned the isolator back on at the inverter, and a quick check showed the existing panels still working as normal. On reflection though, I wasn't overly happy with the robustness of the setup. I was concerned that the connection to the bottom panel might end up being put under strain under windy conditions, as well as the cables rubbing on the roof tiles and the connector being very exposed to the elements. A few days later then, I was back up on the roof again and this time installed a short catenary wire running from the lower panel support rail across to the house wall. So there we go, we've got plenty of slack underneath the panel, so there's no danger of putting any strain on the connections there. And it runs along the double-stranded catenary. A little bit of strain relief here, and then temporarily down the drain pipe. Coiled up, ready for installing the panels. Jump forward to early December and I've finally ordered the panels and Renusol Console tubs from ITS Technologies in Manchester. Having previously purchased my Pylon-Tech battery from them, I found their pricing reasonably competitive, although delivery was a bit on the steep side. I'll cover all the costs later in the video. So why choose Trina Vertex 450 watt panels when my originals were Jinko Solar 375 watts? Well, even though it was only 2.5 years since we'd had the system installed, try as I might, I couldn't find more of them anywhere. And of course, things have moved forward anyway, with higher power, lower cost panels increasingly available. But you can't just pick any old panel. As my existing 6 panels are connected in series, I needed to select a new panel that had a maximum power current rating as close as possible to the old Jinko Solars. That's around 10.2 amps. A higher current rating might be fine, but a significantly lower current rating wouldn't be any good. Why? Well, if the current rating of the new panels was, for example, 9 amps, then that would limit the current flow through the existing 6 Jinko panels to 9 amps as well, with the result that the maximum power for each of the 6 Jinko panels would be reduced from 375 watts to 331 watts. That's a 12% reduction. Conversely, whilst a higher current rating would on face value be advantageous in that it would not impact the performance of the existing panels, I found that a lot of higher current panels tended to have a lower voltage rating. A good example of this would be the 420 watt Tiger Neo N-types from Jinko Solar. Although having the advantage of being visually very similar to my existing panels, the lower voltage of 32 volts, when combined with the 10.2 amp current figure, would result in an actual maximum power of 327 watts, and that's a dismal 78% of the quoted 420 watt figure. After a bit of searching, I eventually found the Trina Vertex 450 watt panels, which looked to offer a good match in terms of current being within 0.1 amp of the existing panels. With a nice high voltage figure, the fact they could be ordered with no minimum order quantity, and a pretty decent price, the decision was made. So what might I expect from my soon-to-be 8-panel East Bank array? Using the NOCT, that's the normal operating cell temperature figures, which are more representative of what is likely to be achieved in practice, I should expect in the region of a 40% increase in power output from my East Bank. This equates to a 20% increase across the system as a whole. Well, the goodies have arrived. I just need to figure out where to put them. On the garage roof, of course. But not just yet, as Storm Dara was due any day, so of course you temporarily stuff them in your greenhouse and shed. Luckily they fit, just. After all, they'll only be there for a few days until the weather has calmed down, or so I thought. Okay, Storm Dara has been and gone, so time to crack on with the installation. If you're not familiar with the Renusol Console system for installer solar panels, their main attraction in my view is their simplicity. You basically just need to position them, drop in a load of ballast, mount the panels onto them, and the job's done. The ballast can be paving flags, concrete blocks, or as I plan to use, gravel or similar stone chippings. When I first started thinking about this upgrade, after looking at various forums and online articles, I'd somehow got the impression that around 50 kilograms of ballast per tub would be more than adequate. Before getting on with it, however, I thought I'd better check and read the installation instructions thoroughly. The console tubs come in different sizes, and I'd got the Console Plus version, which helpfully didn't appear in the ballast table. However, a quick check of the measurements showed that they were the same as the Console 6.2, which of course, being the largest, requires the most ballast. Ignore the yellow highlighting around the console 5.2 row, by the way. That's just an artifact from within the document. So, according to the table, each tub was going to need somewhere between 83 and 134 kilos of ballast. In the worst case, that meant over 1/4 of a tonne of ballast being loaded onto the garage roof. And that's before you add the weight of the tubs and panels themselves. Additionally, in a higher wind load zone, the ballast needs to be increased by a further 30%. And if you're mounting larger panels using extension rails, just like I was planning, that needs an extra 10%. Starting to get a little bit nervous about all of this. So how do they calculate those ballast figures? Well, as you can see, the document refers to wind load zone 1 for Germany, according to the relevant DIN standard. But how relevant is all that to me in Ormskirk? A little bit of Googling showed that the average wind speed for wind load zone 1 is 22.5 metres per second. And that's the same whether you're in Germany or the UK. Finding this website with its very helpful wind load mapping, I found that Ormskirk was just inside the 23.5 metres per second contour, so about 5% above the zone 1 figure. Taking a fairly simple approach, I felt that if I added 15% to the recommended ballast figures, that's 10% for using extension rails, plus 5% for the additional wind speed, I should probably be okay. So that meant somewhere between 95 kilos and 154 kilos, depending on whether I took the view that the panels were on the exterior of the garage roof space or not. In the end, after a bit of pencil sucking, I plumped for 125 kilos per tub. It came down to a balance between seeing my panels floating off over the Irish Sea or my garage roof potentially collapsing under the load. Adding up the weight of everything that was now going up onto the roof resulted in a total load of 156 kilos per panel, or not far off 1/3 of a tonne in total. But how much load can a flat garage roof hold? Googling this threw up a few different figures, but there seemed to be a consensus of around £20 per square foot. I'd calculated the load just over the area of the panels to be under £17 per square foot, so the load over the full garage roof would likely be significantly lower. All good then, especially as the AI gives the same result, because as we know, AI is infallible, right? After a bit of time spent reading up on joist sizes, spacing and spans, I came to the conclusion that I'd better try and have a look at what was actually behind all that foil bubble insulation. Peeling it back in a few areas showed the joists to be pretty rough 5x2s, or 125 by 50 millimeters in metric money. I found that there were deep notches where the joists met the wall plate and large holes right in the centre of the spans where the electrical cables had been routed. Add to this the fact that the joist spacing was pretty inconsistent, so whilst they might theoretically be able to take the increased load, my confidence level was shaky at best. At this point, I was beginning to regret ever having started this project. Discussing this over a few pints with a mate, his view was, "Nah, it'll be fine, just do it." Not so sure about that. Although I'd already got the Renusol tubs, I started to look at other options for flat roofs, whether from Renusol or elsewhere, but they each had their own disadvantages. So, in the end, I was faced with a choice. Give it up as a bad job and just resell the panels and tubs and take a hit financially, or dive in and strengthen the roof. But where do you start when you're faced with this? Well, after a fair bit of effort and not a little mess, I ended up strengthening 7 of the central joists by the addition of some new joist doublers and in some cases treblers, together with additional lateral support beams. I'll be covering this in much more detail in a follow-up video, so if you're interested to see how I went about it, make sure you're subscribed. And so, finally, with a roof that was hopefully now strong enough to host a square dance, I was ready to get on with the installation. Because the surface of the Renusol console is pretty smooth and I've got a felt roof, I've got a slight concern that if there is any slight movement in the tubs, there shouldn't be with the amount of ballast I'm putting in, but if there is any slight movement in the tubs, whether that might slightly abrade the surface of the felt. So I've purchased some EPDM strip. It's about 5mm thick, and I'm going to put strips down here to provide some cushioning to the surface of the felt. Now, I don't know whether this is necessary or indeed even if it's a good idea, but I'm going to try it anyway, and obviously we'll see over time whether it has any benefit, any effect, whatever. So I'm going to go along and put strips of this EPDM along the main surfaces of the underside of the console, and then we'll be ready to lift the console up onto the garage roof and start putting some ballast in. Okay, well that's that done. Fairly straightforward. This self-adhesive strip works pretty well. Did find that peeling the backing tape back was a bit hit and miss on occasions, but overall pretty easy to use. I think I got it from a place called Rocket Rubber. I'll put a link in the description if anybody's interested. Right, let's do the lifting. Right, I've put a couple of buckets of ballast already up here, just so I've got something immediately to weigh it down with. And of course at this point the breeze starts to pick up, so we'll see how we go. So I think it weighs about 8 kilos, so it's not actually that heavy. The edges can cut into your hands, so well worth wearing gloves. Yeah, that's EPDM. Means you can't slide it. Put it upside down. So I've just put it roughly in position for now and put a couple of buckets inside with ballast in. I'll get the other one ready and bring that up, and then I can do the final positioning. Okay, I think I'll go with that. They're pretty central over the joists, not perfect, but the best I can achieve. Don't want them too far forward, and some space here for getting up and down. Also wanted to leave some access space along the back, just in case I need to get to the gutters or the pipe work. Brought them forward by about 100mm, so they're pretty much central on this strip of felt. Gives just a little bit more space down the back. Anyway, let's get them filled up. Well, that was damn hard work. So I've got 4 25 kilo bags in each tub, so 100 kilos. Bought 5 bags for each, so that's 125. But I think I'm going to have a ponder whether to put that last bag in or not. I'll have another look at the calcs and then make a decision whether to throw the last bag in each tub. So I've got the first mounting rail fitted. A couple of observations. I would have preferred putting a washer behind this bolt head here, but the length of the bolt doesn't really support that. By the time you've allowed to get it enough thread to get into the lock nut behind, there just isn't enough length to accommodate a washer there, but it's not hypercritical. Over here I've had to fit the extension option because of the width of the panel, so that's the bracket or the tab that you screw through into the side of the bucket. There's obviously one at the other end, but here again I prefer to have a washer on both sides here. The hole in the frame is quite a large diameter, and I think too large, or it's a slot more than a hole. It's too large for the size of the nut provided. So just a little bit of fiddling around. These are not too bad. I don't know if you can see there. But certainly easier to do at ground level than up on the roof where there's limited room. So just to be aware of those couple of, they're not shortcomings, but fiddles that you may need to do. Right, 2 panels ready. Just need to figure out how to get them up there. And this is my setup to help get the panels up to the roof. So trusty Black & Decker workmate, must be about 30 years old now. So I've just clamped a pretty sturdy piece of, I think it's 2x4, 2x5, something like that. And then just a little packer block behind on which I'm going to put the base of the panel. And then this is just a piece of plywood with 2 strips of, I guess it's 2x1 planed all around. It's actually what used to be my wood storage rack, which I took down when I was strengthening the roof. But you'll have to watch the other video to see more of that. So make sure you subscribe. So all I'm using to get that initial lift are just some relatively old straps from when we used to have a roof box for the car, and I'm just doing a simple knot under there. Easy to do it. I'll stand on the ground. So what you need to do is slip these brackets around the plastic side of the bucket, and when we're putting the screw in, we need to make sure it comes through the reverse side here, which is where it can tighten down. So that the user instructions are not massively clear, but it needs to go behind the bracket here. You can see that. Now, because I've already created a hole, this one's pretty easy to do, but I've found using a brad awl to create an initial hole through the plastic helps a little bit, rather than just trying to force it through. And then put your fingers up behind, making sure you don't screw through the bracket into your fingers, and just see if you can feel the screw coming through the bracket. And that's not. It just needs to angle slightly down in this case. I can just feel it. Let's see. Yeah, I can feel the screw turning. So now you can just... Now it says not to go mad with the impact driver. So, pretty old-fashioned. I like to feel how tight I'm doing something up. Right, that's fine. It says don't over tighten it because you'll crush the plastic side of the bucket. One down, 3 to go. It's a little bit easier around the back because you've got more clearance, you're not working close to the roof surface. You can also pop your head under here and actually see the screw going into the bracket. So I found it's actually easier if I use an extension. Just gives you the better access. So again, what was I saying about it being easy? Yeah, that's all right. Connecting the new panels into the existing string was straightforward. After isolating at the inverter, I just uncoiled the loop I'd previously tucked away, separated the MC4 connectors and plugged in the 2 new panels in series. I zip tied the connectors to the back of the console tubs to prevent everything from flapping about in the wind, and that was it. Job done. Turn on the isolator and let those electrons flow. So, around 18 months after I'd first had the idea to do this, I finally had my 2 extra panels up and running for the start of March, just in time for an extended period of unseasonably sunny weather. I'm editing this in mid-April, and so far everything seems to be working just fine. It's too early at this point to do any year-on-year comparisons, but looking at the charts from the inverter, it's immediately apparent that PV1, that's the east bank, is generating significantly more power at its peak as compared to PV2, the west bank. For comparison, here's a similar chart from last year where the PV1 and PV2 peaks are pretty much identical, which is what you'd expect given the 6 panels on each bank. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on how the new panels are performing once I've gathered a few months worth of data, so make sure you're subscribed if you're interested to know more. On to the costs then. I'd originally budgeted for a total cost in the region of £700 to £750 as shown here. This excludes the cost of having the garage roof redone, as that needed doing anyway, but for reference we paid a touch under £1,400. The final solar material costs came in well under budget at £621, even allowing for those pretty steep delivery charges. Of course, this figure excludes the costs associated with strengthening the garage roof joists, which I hadn't budgeted for. Even so, after allowing for the C24 graded timber, threaded rod, resin anchors, various coach screws, bolts, nuts, washers and brackets, etc., this still only came to a touch under £200. All in then, a grand total of £817. My original simple payback calculation was that the additional 2 panels should pay for themselves within 4 years, and reduce the payback for the overall system to around 9.5 years. I'll revisit that calculation in my follow-up video, taking account of the first few months' operation, the actual costs and changes in electricity prices, etc. So, knowing what I know now, would I have still gone ahead and done the upgrade? Well, to be honest, I'd say it's probably 50-50. If you'd have told me I was going to have to effectively pull my workshop apart, with all the associated disruption, I'd have definitely had second thoughts. However, now that I've done it, I'm glad I did. Not only are we seeing a significant increase in our solar yield, but I've also got the opportunity to finally revamp the workshop. I've already redone all the mains outlets, which had got completely out of control over the last few years. And at some point we'll start on improved ceiling insulation and then some nice LED panel lighting. So hopefully lots more interesting content to come. Well, if you've stuck with me through to this point, thanks so much for watching. Whilst you may not be faced with exactly the same challenges, I hope you found it interesting and perhaps it's given you some food for thought. Please do give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and consider subscribing if you've not already done so. And with that, I'll call this one done. Hope to see you again next time. Cheers. P.S. If only I could do something similar on the West Bank. Though my wife would probably kill me.